Now I don't typically make these videos slash want to make these videos. In general, I want to talk about things that I like, that are positive, not things that I don't like, that are negative. That being said, this is something that I really want to get off my chest, and that is my personal disappointment in Season 4 of My Hero Academia. Of course you're free to have your own opinion on the matter, this is simply how I feel, what I didn't like about it. Now with that being said, let's get right into it. First thing is, I wanted more of Class 1A, specifically the more interesting characters like Bakugo, Todoroki, maybe even Ida. I know they couldn't really participate since they don't have their licenses yet and they kind of already had their time to shine, but who we did get were less than stellar. I personally don't find Uraraka and Asui interesting in the slightest, which apparently so did the author because they had no meaningful change in participating in all of this. Kirishima had his moment to shine, but he didn't really change. He kind of just learned how to get harder. We kind of just got his backstory, which I found kind of pointless since he isn't even a key member of the cast. It's not like we really needed to see it, it changed nothing. How they even got to go on this mission hardly makes any sense either. How and why were these three just randomly asked by the big three to come work at their agencies? Even though all they knew about them was that they got their asses kicked by Mirio. The only thing that made sense was Midoriya because he was at least proactive and he asked Mirio if he could introduce him to Nighteye. It was like the editor was like, hey, we need more established characters for this arc. So he just threw in some decently popular characters. While we're on the subject of characters, let's talk about the big three. Their inclusion in this arc is justified, but they also have the same problem that Uraraka and Asui did. Nejire is just along for the ride, and we just got some backstory for Tamaki. Now this isn't as big a deal because they were just introduced, so backstory is kind of good, but come on, they blew a chance to really show what they're made of. There is one member of the three that made a big impact, but we'll talk about him a little more later in the video. Now let's move on to the plot. I'm specifically talking about the first half of the season right now. You know, the whole saving Eri thing? First I just want to say how slow it is. The first 5 to 6 episodes is just constant exposition and almost nothing happens. I can't tell you how disinterested I was watching this weekly. Every time I watched it was just a bunch of mumbo jumbo of how the Isekai worked and what they were doing. Of course I know setting everything up is crucial to a story, but the way they go about it is just a snooze fest to me. It was just a bunch of flashbacks that were uninteresting. That's not to say they weren't doing anything interesting, it was just the execution that I found boring, but the concept was honestly pretty great. At first their plan seems like a typical villain plan, to erase all quirks. And when you find out how they make the drug, it becomes even more disturbing. As the story goes on, you start to see the bigger picture of what Chisaki was really after. His motives aren't as common as destroying heroes. He wants to completely control the black market. Overall, I'd say he's a pretty good villain and well thought out villain. Honestly, as I'm writing this, I'm starting to realize how great this arc's concepts were and ideas were. I guess it was just the pacing and the characters used in this arc that disappointed me. Something else disappointed me though. The conclusion. At the end, Shigaraki takes Chisaki's arms and the drugs he made. From what I assumed, Chisaki would never show his face again, which I find a missed opportunity. I don't care how it happens, but I think it would have been awesome to have this sort of three-way struggle between the heroes, the League, and the Isekai. Obviously the author can do what they want with their story, but I just think it would have been really cool. On the bright side, it shows that Shigaraki has grown as a leader and a villain. Now let's talk about the other big three. From what I can tell, the main characters of this arc. First is Sir Nighteye. He's basically the show's equivalent of a lot of people, including me.
You have the power to become a symbol, but you're mediocre.
Basically, he's saying Midoriya is shit and doesn't deserve to have one for all. Now, me being the All Might fanboy I am, I believe there is no one who can take his mantle. However, All Might does believe someone can. Only he doesn't think it's Midoriya. He pushes Midoriya and tries to make him see his own faults, not so that he can be better, but so he can see how pointless it is and give his power to Mirio. That's a pretty good antagonist for Midoriya, all the more complimented by Mirio. Mirio is a fun and energetic dude, everyone seems to like him and he's a great guy. Not only that, but he's also strong. He himself says that his quirk is nothing special and that he had to work incredibly hard to master it. He worked hard enough to go from not being able to simply pass through a thin wall to being able to 1v18 Class 1A. Now this may be unfair since Mirio had his power his whole life while Midoriya only had his for a year, but that's not the point. The point is to show how much brighter Mirio shines and how much better of a hero he is compared to Midoriya. Even with Tamaki, his backstory seemed to serve two purposes: to see Tamaki rise from his own insecurities, and to show how Mirio inspired him to become stronger and believe in himself. Basically, Mirio shows Midoriya just how much further he has to go and how much harder he has to work. Coupled with the fact that Nighteye, All Might's old sidekick doesn't believe in him until right before he dies, brings us right to the disappointment of all of Season 4. The death of Nighteye and Lemillion. As I was saying, Nighteye was a great foil for Midoriya. He made him see his own inadequacies, and could have been used in the story to really push Midoriya and let him know that not everyone is going to believe in you. Instead, he ends up dying, which is obviously a sad thing, but narratively his purpose is just completely cut off, and coupled with the fact that Lemillion also dies, or in a coma, since Mirio's quirk gets taken away, he can no longer really push Midoriya to get better. I know Midoriya already has his own drive to become the #1 hero, but having someone so naturally heroic could really influence him and make him push himself even harder. I mean, Midoriya literally gave up on his dream because he thought Mirio deserved One for All more, and because Mirio is such a great guy, he wouldn't take it, because it would trouble Midoriya. Personally, I wish Mirio still had his quirk because he is my second favorite character next to All Might, so I would have liked to see him more. Also, his introduction in the last episode of Season 3 was great, and I was looking forward to seeing a lot more of him. Instead, we only saw him in action for one arc, and if that's not disappointing, I don't know what is. Like, just imagine if Nighteye survived and Mirio lost his quirk. Nighteye would probably lose all patience and really start pushing Midoriya to give One for All to Mirio. Like in the show, I don't think Mirio would have accepted it, or at least not so quickly, but it would have created some serious drama. Now, there isn't much to say about the second half of this season. You either love it or you hate it. The show basically turns into a slice of life, which I didn't have a problem with personally because I actually like slices of life. It was also full of great character interactions and character moments, like when All Might and Endeavor had a chat. And even Endeavor's growth as a character. Even Bakugo has shown some great improvement. Like I said though, it's just a festival arc, so nothing really happens narratively. But if you were starved of your favorite characters and wanted more character interactions like me, then I'm sure you enjoyed this arc. And if you didn't, well then I don't know about you, but I call that a disappointment. As I wrote this, I figured out what I really value from My Hero Academia. It's not the story, although I am interested in it. That's not what made me come to love the series. It was the characters. After really thinking about it, the story of the overhaul arc was really good and definitely better than I gave it credit for. What I was missing were the characters. They decided to use characters I just didn't care for and introduce characters we just didn't have any connection with. The fact that I enjoyed the next arc more just reinforces that. So I don't think it's fair for me to call this season disappointment. It just wasn't my cup of tea personally. But what did you think of the season? Personally, I'd rank it as my least favorite. I'm interested to know what you thought though. Did you love it? Did you hate it? Or are you somewhere in between? Let me know in the comments below. And if you enjoyed, consider leaving a like and subscribing. See you next time. I forgot to mention that I miss All Might.